Amen. Thank you, Lucinda. Please, everybody, take your seats. Unless your name's Nicky, and then you better come up.
Right, we're going to start off with a water challenge. Good morning, everybody. Sorry. And thank you for having me today. I'm delighted to be here. So we have a water challenge, and I hope that Gerard might help me with selecting volunteers. I need 2, preferably youngish people, I think. So who perhaps be up for this little challenge. You might get a little bit wet, but hopefully not too wet. We've got lots of protection. How are we doing? We've got one. Have we got another? Excellent, excellent. Okay. So if you could stand either side of this big green thing. So one of you standing here and one of you standing there. Right, okay. So what we're going to do is you're going to have a challenge to fill up the container as quickly as you can that you've got in front of you. Okay? Now there is some water in the bucket, so you need to use your smaller item to fill up the big one, which has got the measurements on, and we'll just see how you do, see who does the best on this one. Is that all right? Are you both happy? Both know what to do? Do you want to roll your sleeves up a bit, do you think, just in case? I'd hate you to get too soggy. Okay, so are you ready for this? We know what you're going to do? Okay. And just try to keep it on the table as much as you can, otherwise I'll be in trouble with Gerard afterwards, okay? Right. Are you ready? Steady, go! Right, everybody watching, see how it goes. Just see which one gets filled up the quickest. How are we doing? Should we cheer them on a bit? Go, yes, come on, yay. Remember not to overflow it. Well, just a tiny bit more, I think. Okay, I think we better stop there. Okay, stop. Well done. Okay, so should just give them a round of applause, first of all. Well done, both of you. And so what do we two think about that competition? Anything to say? I mean, obviously, you filled yours up first. What do you think about that? Do you think you did well?
Yes.
Okay. Any reason, anything else you want to say about the competition?
No.
That's all right. No. What about you? Do you think you did well? Okay.
Yes.
And what do you want to say about the competition? Anything you noticed?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. Right. Can you tell us why it was harder?
Because I had to fill all of it and mine was bigger.
Yes. Did you notice that?
Yep.
Did anyone else notice that? Yes.
It's not
Thank
fair.
You. It's very not fair. Yes. And, I mean, could you just give a little demo with your cup? Could you just put your cup in there and hold it up for everybody, in case anybody at the back didn't notice? Perhaps not too much water in there, but yes. Do we see what's going on there? Yes. It has got a hole in it. So was that fair?
No.
What about yours? Did yours have a hole in it? No, absolutely. So, I think we might just say it's not fair. It wasn't a very fair competition, was it? So, and I think you both did very well. I think you both did as well as each other, really, didn't you? But you did have a little bit of an advantage with better equipment, didn't you? Yeah. And I think you did pretty well, because you got it pretty full, actually, despite a leaky cup and a much bigger container, didn't you? Yeah. So well done. Let's give them another round of applause. You can pop your things back on the table. That's fine. Thank you, both of you. There's no prizes today, but maybe later in the hall when we do the store. Do you want to go and have your seats again? Thank you. Okay, well done. And I think we've got a couple of slides, just because what we're thinking about today is whether it is fair, whether life is fair, whether the world is fair, whether trade is fair. And, just got to go back quite a way, I think. I think it's there. Maybe no, much further back. Perhaps it's not there. Anyway, there was a couple of slides really showing the difference perhaps between farming in some countries where maybe they don't have tractors, they don't have equipment, they just have hoes and just basic handheld tools. And if we think about in this country, most of our farmers have great big shiny tractors. It all gets done a lot quicker, doesn't it? So I think, in a bit like with our water challenge really, things can be very unfair sometimes in the differences in our lives. And yet we're all the same human beings made in the likeness of God. So that's what we're thinking about today. Is it our job to make the world a bit fairer?
And it is, well, I say it is. Let's hear why. Because the Bible says so. When we're going to hear a reading from the Bible, that Isabella and Carrier are going to come and read to us. And they're going to read to us from Isaiah and chapter 58. You stand here behind the water.
Ready, but I'm a Fairtrade enthusiast, and particularly a tradecraft enthusiast. So, thanks, Silas. So I'm going to share a little bit with you today about a trip I did. I feel that tradecraft particularly expresses my Christian faith, my love for the world and all its people, in a small way. We all have to do things in a small way to make a big difference, I think. And I'm really aware over the years, as I've been involved in tradecraft, of the difference it does make to people's lives. And back in September last year, I had the opportunity to travel to Peru on a trip called Spectacular Peru, which pretty much describes that country. It is an amazing country. And it's where I saw really God at work, where through tradecraft, where he's actively seeking out the poorest, the most marginalized, most remote communities in the world. And to me, I think that very much expresses what Jesus did. He went out, when his time on earth, he went out and expressed his love and his justice for those most marginalized people. He didn't hang around with the rich people. And I think tradecraft gives us an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of that time in Peru, hopefully. I can use my slide clicker. It's not it's the earliest set of slides with the Peru pictures on. I think it's a little bit further back in the presentation. Are they not there? Okay, we'll just have a quick look. Meanwhile, I'll tell you a little bit about my trip to Peru without the slides. Basically, it's a trip that's organised by a company called Meet the People Tours, and they are linked with tradecraft. So they take you on a trip where you go and meet many of the producers that produce the tradecraft products. So while I was out in Peru, I went with a group of other people. There were 12 of us all together, and we had a guide that took us around. So we started off in Lima, which is the capital of Peru, as many of you probably know. It's a very big city. It's big as London. About 10 million people live there. And it's a very sort of divided city, I guess, like many of our cities in the UK as well, and many cities around the world, really, where you've got the main centre, the government buildings, all looking really, quite posh, I think is probably the way I would describe it. This might be it. Hurrah. Right, good. I just had to put in a picture of a llama, because if you go to Peru, you have to see llamas. And this one was just outside the hotel, one of the hotels we were staying at with its baby. Very cute. So this is map of Peru, just in case anybody didn't realize it was in South America. I'm sure most of you do. And you can see it's the big green country that takes up quite a big chunk of South America. Before I went there, I hadn't kind of realized quite how big it was. A lot of it is Andes Mountains. So a lot of the communities that we visited were actually living in these really remote communities in the mountains, very high up. A big chunk of the country is also Amazon jungle, which I did also visit. I'll tell you about that afterwards, perhaps. Okay. And this is Lima. This is the center part of the capital of Lima. So you can see the buildings are quite posh, it's quite a nice city, nicely laid out, really smart buildings, influenced by the Spanish, because as you probably know, the Spanish dominated Peru for many years, many centuries. And then you go out of the city centre and you go into the shantytown area. And this was taken from a bus, so it's not a brilliant picture, but you get the idea. Big heap of a hill, just absolutely covered in tiny little buildings. And basically what happened in the 80s, there was a civil war in Peru. It's had quite a turbulent history. A lot of the people fled the war and came to live in Lima. And they didn't have any rights as citizens. The government didn't sort of recognize them. And they just sort of put up a shack, basically, and just lived the best they could. Often it was made of plastic. And you saw quite a lot of the people from this shantytown area in the touristy areas, and selling stuff. This lady has got a whole load of goods on her back. Sometimes they were little snack food, sometimes they were little craft items. And that was the way they had to live, because they weren't getting any support from the government. This lady we met, we actually stayed at the guest house above her workplace. She's called Janina. And for the last 20 odd years, she's run an organization called Manos Amigas, which those of you who speak Spanish might know it means it's to do with friendly hands, which I think is rather a nice name. And she supports some of these artisans, these craft people living in the shanty towns. And she set up a Fairtrade organization to ensure that these people have a better life and can get a better life for their families. So we went to visit one of them in the morning, and his name was Carlos. You can see he's the one who's squatting down there. He, at the age of 10, moved with his family into Lima, into this shantytown area, and basically the family built a plastic shack. And you can see the remains of that because he still lives in the same place. You can just about see the plastic behind on the, can't work it out, right-hand side of the picture. And that's the first part of what he built. That forms part of the workshop. They now have a ceramic workshop there, he and his family, and he employs other people too. So he's come a long way in those 30 years since he came over. And you can see here the difference between the kinds of buildings. As he's earned a little bit of money for himself and his family, they've been able to build a little bit of a wooden building. So that's the next step up. When you have a wooden building, the government will give you a water supply in Peru, but not before that. You have nothing before that. And then when you have a little bit more, you can build a brick building. Then you get electricity too. So he's well on the way now. And he's been able to set up these workshops and obviously have a kiln to fire all these ceramic pieces. And here you can see some of the people, most of these were family members or extended family, but they're all earning money because of fair trade, and they're having a much better life. Their children are getting educated, and they're, some of them have got ambitions to go off to university and so on. And Manos Amigas, the fair trade organization, will actually give them grants and things so that they can actually get their children off to university. So it's a really great organisation and is making a massive difference to people's lives. And this is one of our favourite pieces. A lovely piece of the ceramic, the Last Supper made from ceramic. We wanted to buy it, but they didn't want to sell it. I can understand why. It's a very beautiful piece. Very intricate, and the work was very specialised. They were really skilled craftspeople. This family was a visit we made. This is in a very remote part of Peru called the Altiplano. And this is towards the south. Some of you might have heard of Lake Titicaca, might have learnt of that in geography. I remember that name always stands out. It's a huge lake. Part of it's in Bolivia as well. But near there's a lot of very highland mountains. And these people are farmers. And I love their big hats. But they need them because the sun is very hot when it comes out there. But it's also very cold when the wind blows. Very sort of bleak area in many ways. But it's very fertile, very good for growing quinoa. And they were delighted to see that I showed them a photograph of this quinoa that we sell in our Fairtrade shop in my village. So they were very excited to see that their stuff was actually making its way to the UK and helping them to earn their living. So these two guys were very happy people. But you get a little bit of an idea of the land there. They were preparing it ready for sowing the next crop. Jumped there. So you'll see, this is a picture I took of a picture, so not quite such good quality, but it just gives you an idea of what the quinoa plant looks like. I was really surprised how pretty it was. It's a bit like lupins or some other nice garden plant, but it's growing very well in this area, but they needed a lot of help from a fair trade cooperative. And that's where this organisation comes in. So this is a cooperative of I think it's about 400 farmers who can sell their quinoa to this cooperative, and then they can then package it up and export it to the UK and other countries all over the world. And it's really improves their farming techniques because they're able to share tractors and other machinery. And it's really making a big difference to their lives, and they're improving the lives of their families, again, as a result of a fair trade organisation that works with tradecraft. So it was really wonderful to see how much good work was being done. The last one I just want to quickly show you, also in this Altiplano area. These women were part of a farming group again. The men did the sort of actual farming, looked after the alpaca, which is another creature, as many of you know, a bit like a llama, and has this wonderful soft fleece. And So the men looked after the alpaca on the hills, and then the women did the processing of the wool. And they just had it in heaps on the floor. I don't know how many of you are knitters and have seen this kind of stuff done before, but they have a thing called a drop spindle where they just pull out the fleece, the thread, and then they wind it around the spindle and then just let it drop, and then it sort of twists itself. It's very clever, but very simple, because they don't have much money. Now, what was sad about this organisation was they were part of a Fairtrade cooperative, but unfortunately that cooperative went bust. Basically, I think the leader of the cooperative died and somebody else was ill, and that was it. There wasn't anyone else to take it over. So although they'd been supported for about 30 years by this Fairtrade cooperative, suddenly it was no more, and now they're really struggling to sell their stuff. That's one of our team having a go at spinning. And so what they do is when they get any visitors, they spread out their wares, all the stuff they've knitted from this lovely alpaca wool, and they spread it out on the ground, and then it was up to us to give them a bit of support and buying a few things, which we're very keen to do, because it was very lovely stuff. But the only other opportunity they get now is to sell in local markets, and they have to drive a long way to get to those, so it's very difficult for them. And a lot of them have got quite isolated, I think, as a result, and not really, they're really struggling to get by. So I think it was good to see both, to see the good that Fairtrade does, but also where we struggle. But despite that, this lady, Mariella, had a wonderful smile, was very good at posing for a photo, but they were very warm and friendly and really lovely people. And this one, I just put this one in just to give you an idea of how spectacular Peru is. This is a service station in Peru, which was absolutely beautiful, looking out over the Andes, and they had a few things to sell as well. And I think that's it for my Peru ones, yes. Thank you. Anyway, so I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other stuff later.
Thank you very much, Nicky. Thank you. Yeah, spectacular indeed. The service station wasn't anything like the ones you get on the M6, was it, really? But there we can see the difference that being fair, thinking about fairness, about how what we buy and how it's produced is so important. We'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment. But right now, we're going to do something to get us moving again, and Supreme is going to come and lead us in that. So again, if you're able, I need you to stand. We sang this about a month ago.
So at least it's warmed us up a bit, hasn't it, with all this cold snow, and maybe we haven't got our normal exercise, not been out as much because of the weather. So, okay. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Fairtrade and tradecraft now, and a little bit more about sort of why we need to do it, really, and I'm just sort of thinking a little bit more about is it our job, really, to help make the world fairer. And we heard in the Isaiah reading, didn't we, that God has a real heart for justice and fairness. And if you look in your Bible, especially if you've got a concordance or an index, you look up the word justice, and it comes up even more than love. Well, according to my Bible anyway, which I find amazing. So I think that really tells us that God really does have a heart for justice and fairness. And the way we treat others is very much part of that. And that came out in the Isaiah reading as well. So I think we can do that through tradecraft and fair trade products in the way we choose what to buy. We don't even have to be, giving lots of extra donations, but actually we can just choose to buy differently. We can choose to buy in an ethical way. And I thought I'd just start with just explaining the difference between tradecraft and fair trade, because I'm kind of switching between those two names. So tradecraft is a business. It's an organisation that's committed to strong ethical values and to trading fairly. And it aims to really, I guess, do the job, as I said earlier, that Jesus did, really, seeking out remote, marginalised, unsupported communities that wouldn't stand a chance in the normal world trade stuff. And it really seeks those people out and really tries to give them a better chance than they would otherwise have. And we know that world trade isn't fair. There's a lot of distortion there, a lot of things that are not fair about world trade. And the difference, I think, then, is that tradecraft is all about strong ethics, strong fair trade principles. That's all it does. Whereas the fair trade is actually just a set of criteria. Basically what it means, it's a standardization, if you like. So you see fair trade on quite a lot of products in supermarkets. But it won't mean that supermarket is all about fair trade, or that line of products, like Cadbury's, for example, isn't all about fair trade just because they have one product that's fair trade, if that makes sense. So it's very much about a set of criteria, a set of standards, really, the fair trade logo. It's a good thing. I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but I think it's just to be aware of the difference between the two. So I hope I haven't confused you even more with that. Okay. Right. I think I'm going to move on to the next slide. Yeah. So this is really just reiterating that sense that justice is there in the Bible. It's very much, as I said, in God's heart. Being kind to your neighbour, that comes up a lot, doesn't it, in the stories that Jesus told, the Good Samaritan, for example. Help the poor, be fair. And Tradecraft also does a lot of campaigning, and it also has a linked charity as well. So there's lots of different ways that we can support Tradecraft. So we have a map of the world now. And I suppose I just want to kind of help us all to ask the question, is it our responsibility really? I mean, we're here in the UK. We know there's a lot of problems in the UK as well. There's a lot of people struggling. So is it really our responsibility to think about people in remote places in the world? Is it really up to us? Well, I think it is. And I think quite a lot of you here do think it is. So just want to talk a little bit more about that really. So I wonder, those of you that can, I mean, it's a cold day, so I don't expect anyone to take lots of layers off or anything like that, but if you're able, can you have a look at your next door neighbour's ticket in the back of their clothing and see if you can see where their garments were made? If you don't mind, I mean, obviously it needs to be somebody you're very happy to do that with, but just have a look, see if you could find somewhere on the label that tells you where something was made. And when you've got an answer, if you stick your hand up, I'd love to hear. Right, do you want to come and tell me? Oh, could you? Yes. I'll get Gerard to do this bit.
Italy. Yeah. Italy.
Italy, okay.
Supreme. Anybody else?
See where they come from.
Erica.
Made in China.
Made in China.
China.
Both made in China.
Both made in China.
Both in China, okay. China's
Anybody else? What we
country?
got? Oh, what we got?
Vietnam.
Vietnam. Oh, yeah, I thought Vietnam might come
right.
up. Sasha, hold on. China also, okay.
China
There's a lot of
again,
fumbling going on.
popular.
China. We're getting China down here as well. Emma, what we got?
Turkey.
Turkey. Oh, yes.
Turkey, right,
very
yes.
popular one.
Yep.
Another one. Amen. Oh. Got one here.
Oh, we've got one over here.
Romania. We've got Romania down here
Cambodia,
as well.
Thank you. Right, Cambodia up on the stage
Cambodia.
here. Thailand again, okay. Bulgaria. Sri Lanka.
Savile Row.
Oh, Savile Row, of course. I
No,
wouldn't
only
expect,
joking. Only
wouldn't expect
joking.
anything
Sorry.
less than my brother. Yeah.
I wish.
Okay, thank you. So I hope that wasn't too uncomfortable, and please don't take your layers off too much because it's a nice warm church, but yeah, it's a cold day out there. Okay, so what does that tell us? Well, I think it tells us, doesn't it, that we are actually dependent on lots of other countries for our clothing, for a start. So we can't really say, oh no, we'll just look after ourselves in the UK because we're self-sufficient, we can manage. We can't, because we do depend on the rest of the world for so many things. What about breakfast? Anybody had breakfast here today? Would you like to put your hand up if you had some breakfast? Yes, good. It's good, because it's supposed to be a very important meal, isn't it? So, okay. I've got a picture of some breakfast here just to prompt us to think about what you might have had for breakfast. So, some of you may have had fruit, maybe bananas. Anyone have bananas for breakfast? I did. Yeah, so bananas, apart from in Kew Gardens and 1 or 2 places like that, they don't grow in the UK, do they? Anybody know where they do grow? Does anybody have any idea about where they might come from?
Caribbean, I'm here.
Caribbean, yeah.
Caribbean.
That's, yeah.
Yeah.
Jamaica, yeah,
Somebody say
absolutely.
Jamaica,
yeah.
yes. Oh, I'm coming down here. Somebody say.
Yeah, Nigeria, yeah, absolutely.
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica, yes.
Costa Rica.
They did grow in Peru as well. Saw some growing there. Yeah. So again, they don't really grow in the UK. So many of us love our bananas, don't we? But a lot of the bananas we can buy in the supermarkets are not fair trade. And so the people who are not part of a fair trade organisation are really struggling with their bananas. Okay, anyone have sort of sugary products for their breakfast? Cereal or sugar on their in their tea or their coffee? Yes, yep. Some of you are admitting to having sugar. We're all encouraged not to have too much, but yes, we still have a lot of sugar, don't we? Now, again, we do have a bit of sugar growing in the UK, sugar beet, but we can't manage all our sugar from there. So we're reliant on the sugar from all over the world, and lots of Caribbean countries, African countries provide us with sugar. So lots of our breakfast ingredients would have come from different parts of the world. And there was a lovely quote, Martin Luther King. I'm not sure I'm quoting it exactly, but many of you will be familiar with Martin Luther King. He's a great man. And he said that before you finish your breakfast in the morning, you will have depended on half the world. And I think that's true again, isn't it? It's that sense that we depend on those people to provide a lot of stuff for us. So maybe that makes us ask the question, okay, so shouldn't we care a bit more about them? Because most of those people who are providing a lot of that stuff are working in very poor conditions. If it's not fair trade, if it's not tradecraft, their conditions will be very, very poor. They won't be earning very much money. They will be being exploited. There may be child labour. There may be slavery. There may be all sorts of things that are really bad practices. And maybe we just don't know about it because food chains are very complicated, aren't they? We often, we buy stuff from supermarket, but we don't always know exactly where stuff has come from. So maybe we do have a responsibility because if they depend on us to make trade fair, then maybe that's something we need to do something about because we have a heart for justice and love to all the people of the world and we need to care about them because they depend on us in the way that we depend on them. So I think it's really important. Okay. And this is just another picture. This is from a church that our church was linked with in Kenya and the school nearby, which was struggling. Now this is the kitchen. So I don't suppose many school kitchens in the UK or where food is prepared in schools in the UK look much like this. And this was the classroom. And you can see there's quite a lot of kids there. Looks like quite a few of them don't have a seat. There are a few desks, but there's not much on the walls, is there? And when you think of what a lot of the schools in the UK, they're covered with wonderful displays, there's whiteboards and all sorts of things that do all sorts of clever stuff. This was a classroom in a school I visited in Peru, where they were getting a lot of support from Tradecraft and other charities as well. You can see the conditions are so much better. These girls are getting a much better education as a result of having a lot of care, a lot of resources going to help them. So, what can we do about it? Well, there's quite a lot we can do. Gerald's already mentioned that we've got a little mini Fairtrade shop set up this morning, so you can come and visit the shop and see what you can buy. I'd like to encourage you to think about perhaps just changing one item that you buy already. So maybe if you buy bananas, try and make sure you buy Fairtrade bananas each time you're shopping. There's quite a lot of choice. A lot of the supermarkets do have those. Maybe there's something else, another product. You could start trying out the Fairtrade version of that product. And that can make such a difference to one person's life just by you changing your purchase. Sometimes people argue it's a bit more expensive. Sometimes they are. But I think quite a lot of the prices are quite competitive. You could support the events that you do have here. I know Francis was telling me that you do have Fairtrade events a couple of times a year. So when those happen, definitely support them. I've got a few catalogues here. You can take away a catalogue because you can order stuff online. And you can also look up the Tradecraft website. It has lots of actions you can do there in terms of campaigning to make the world a bit fairer in terms of justice and trade. And you can pray about it. So there's a huge amount of things that we can all do. And one of the other things I would just say quickly before I finish, when I was in Peru, I also spent 3 days in the Amazon jungle, which was very exciting. Quite a noisy place in a way, but also quite relaxing. But one of the things I was struck with there was just how connected everything is and how every plant, every animal depended on each other. They all were part of a big network, and you were very aware of that in somewhere like the jungle. And I think that's how we are in the world. We're all very, very connected. We all need to be aware of the connections that we have with each other. So, and we have this big, wonderful, beautiful world. So let's just enjoy those connections through fair trade and tradecraft. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Big Sis.